We're not going to spend much time today on mechanics because by this point you should have watched the video from our Monday session so that you are up to date with everything. And so what I really want to do is quickly remind some important due dates and then really start to get into the meat of our content today. So a couple of reminders. First of all, if you have not completed orientation quiz number 2, it's due today. Please don't forget, otherwise you'll get a 0. And remember that it will prepare you to do well for your completion of your discussion forums and your journals in the course. You also have due your first discussion forum on September 9th. Your first response to a classmate is September 13th, and then your first journal is September 10th. I want you to continue to think about your term project proposals. Those are coming up at the end of September, and we're going to continue to work on them. And remember, we have no class in the school on Monday and Tuesday next week. Right? Those are holidays. Yes. Okay. So as you can see, we're going to be in 2.2 in our textbook, so you are welcome to follow along. And what we're going to be doing is talking about a lot of theories. So self-discrepancy is a theory, social comparison theory, looking glass theory, individualist versus collectivist theory, self-enhancement bias theory, and some others. So by now you've recognized, and as I've said even before, communication studies takes from all disciplines. That's why it's such a rich degree to get and why many employers like to hire people with this degree, because it gives you such a well-roundedness in understanding the psychology of people, the sociology of organizational structures and of work environments, the culture of where you work, where you travel to, etc. And then there's, of course, the sciences that are hard, such as the physiology, the anatomy, the neurolinguistics, and all those other things. So this is a pretty amazing field. To start, I'd like for you to look in your book, so pull up your laptops if you have not done that, or your cell phones, and you can follow along. Or please, I encourage you to take some notes, because a lot of these terms are what we're going to see on your exam. And also, these are the ones that you can select from as I talk through all these for your project. So the first thing I want to do is talk about the self-discrepancy theory. And we're going to talk about that by looking at, according to this theory, the 3 selves. So each of us have what's known as our ideal self. This is the self we really are striving to be. We really wish we were. This is the perfect version of ourselves. But we also have what other people think we should be. And that's called our ought. Our ought self is when people evaluate their observations of us and in terms of what we do and don't do and don't say, etc. And they see that there is some lacking or opportunity for development, or just you piss people off, etc. All right? So there's something going on here that others are saying is not what you should be, okay? And then we also have your actual self. This is your truth. This is who you are. This is all of those discussions of what we talked about. That's your conscious self, your unconscious self. These are all of the things that you really are aware of and some things that you're not aware of when you are interacting with all kinds of people, all the different people in your life, all right? So, as you can imagine, this is an important point of understanding who you are. And if you remember back on our class yesterday, we talked about the self-concept. And the self-concept, when you listed all those descriptors or those feelings in answer to the I am statements, those are the things that you believe you are. That's your actual self, all right? Now, we talked the other day also about the looking glass self. So let me help you visualize this looking glass self. If we were to say that this is a big old mirror, all right? And in that mirror, when we look at it, we get a reflection back. The reflection back is how others see us, all right? So it could be people from the same culture that we have, all right? So it's the same people that we interact with all the time. So it's the college scene, it's the Sandhills Community College scene, it's the group of people who speak the same language as you, who practice the same faith tradition as you, who even identify as the same gender as you. So, or not, all right? So these are the similarities and the differences. And you oftentimes feel that the culture sees you as different through those building blocks we talked about of words. Remember, the absence of a word is just as much communication as a word itself. Very important. To say nothing oftentimes speaks volumes, right? So the absence or the spoken or the nonverbal. So if your culture differs, you're going to get a response. So when you look at yourself in this mirror, all right, you might see, oh, I don't fit in, or I just made a mistake, or I just offended somebody. Conversely, oh, wow, I must be on the same page as these people. I must believe the same things that they do because I'm getting lots of smiles back, all right? So a lot is going on. There might even be people who say nothing and leave you up to fill in the space. Now we're going to talk about that later, and that's schemata, all right? If we don't have information, we create our own, and it may not be true. So if somebody, we're just going to do a straight line for that smile, which is really no smile at all. If we're getting no reflection of ourselves back from our culture, then we will fill in with, oh, I must be fine, or, oh, I must not be fine, all right? And we're going to fill in our blanks. It can be very dangerous, and we'll learn about that a little bit more. All right, so your culture will be a looking glass of yourself. But we also are going to see that we have a lot of different learnings that we get from our family. All right? And because they are with us more often than anybody else, that family reflection is going to be powerful. And in a few minutes, I'll explain how that really works by the words that they say, the phrases that they use, by the attributions that they give to you, or what they think are your motivators, etc. All right? So you start to understand how your family loves you or does not, feels about you, or thinks about you based on how they treat you, right? So that's your family. Then, of course, you're also going to have your social network. And with social, we're also going to put in your work. Okay, so these are the same thing as I said before. You're going to get a reflection. If your supervisor says you need to be on time and says it with a unhappy face, then the reflection that you are getting back about how that person perceives you and therefore how you feel about yourself is that you're not a very good employee. Right? So building blocks. This is all passing occurrences, accumulation of occurrences that continue through communication, establish your perceptions of yourself. All right? And then there's your own psychology, like I said. All right? This is your intrapersonal communication to yourself. So this is how you talk to yourself and how you talk about yourself. So this goes back into the intra, right? And this is highly self-evaluating, okay? So this is where you are evaluating yourself as you look in the mirror. One of the reasons why people don't like videotaping ourselves or audio recording ourselves is because we're doing this. When we listen back, we are going to reflect into our brain or our heart that which was good or that which is bad. Okay? So again, that is Cooley's looking glass self. Very important. Okay, so additionally, when we look at the people here, if you scroll over to page 40 in your online textbook, it demonstrates that there's a lot of verses going on. So your ideal versus your actual self, who you really are, versus, competing against or comparing against what you wish you were. Same thing. How your family, your friends, your bosses, they all have a feeling of what you ought to be versus what their ideal perception of you should be, right? And then here, what you actually are versus your ought. So all of this gets conflicted. It causes many of us to get confused and not knowing which direction we should go in. Or is the path we are taking the path we need to stay on? Okay. So the actual versus your own ideals, all right? So if these are your own ideals, all right, that's when you have an overall feeling that you are not obtaining your desires and hopes, which then could lead you to feeling a disappointment or dissatisfaction. If your actual versus others ideals of you, then you have an overall feeling that we're not obtaining significant others' desires. Think of this in your special, intimate relationships and hopes for us. So your family, okay, you're thinking that your feeling is that they're not happy with who you are or who you are becoming, with what you're striving to be, etc., which leads to feelings sometimes of shame or even embarrassment. Then there's your actual versus the others oughts, all right? And now you've got, again, an overall feeling that we're not meeting what others see as our duties and our obligations. What are our responsibilities? What are we supposed to be doing, right? Which leads us to feelings of feeling agitated, oftentimes stressful, anxiety-ridden, and of course the fear of a potential punishment, okay? Especially if there's some kind of a reward or punishment component. And then the actual, your actual versus your own, okay, ought, all right, which can lead, this is when you know personally that you're not meeting your obligations. You're missing due dates. Nobody else knows except for maybe your teacher, but you're missing them. Or you set a personal goal and you're not meeting it at the date that you thought you were going to make it. So this could mean that you start to feel like you're falling short of your own moral standards. Let me give you an example. When I was in my 20s, I had a goal of becoming a director of a department by the time I reached my 30s. I achieved it at 28. When I was in my 30s, I had a personal goal, my ideal, that I would reach the position of a vice president of a huge division in an organization, and I didn't reach it until I was 42. All right, so that little time frame between 40 and 42 made me feel like, whoa, what am I doing wrong? What do I need to do to step this up so that I'm living up to the standards that I have created for myself? All right, so those are important elements. Now, let's think about how these elements influence. And again, we're going to do it by looking at words, okay? So skip over to the next page, on page 41. And if you remember correctly, we talked last class about not last class, but earlier, compliance gaining strategies. All right. And a compliance gaining strategy, we gave you all kinds of a list. So if you decide to do something, if you decide to live up to your responsibilities based on what others are saying to you, all right? It comes from outside of you. It comes from a supervisor or a parent or a significant other or a teacher, all right? And if you decide to take the action that the others ought, you or think you should do, think of ought as also should, you should do, then you are allowing outside forces to get you to comply with them. And that's what we call an extrinsic motivator. Bonuses, punishment, extra days off, reduce in force and getting laid off. What are the things that you are afraid of or that you are motivated by? Okay, if they're coming from outside of your control, control is outside, then that means it is extrinsic, external. Okay. However, if, as I was describing to you, my goal of wanting to become a director and then a president, a vice president, and I never thought I'd ever make a senior VP, but I did. But anyway, so those are my goals. Those are what I saw for myself, okay? So those are what we would call, if we look at the own, we're going to call these intrinsic motivators because they are internal. Nobody tells me I have to do that. Nobody's holding a gun to my head. Nobody's necessarily even, getting more money to me. I know that I will have a title and I'll make six figures once I have reached that vice president kind of role. So I am motivating myself, all right, because I want to drive a nice car, because I want to have a house with a pool, all right, because I want to travel to Europe, all right. These are things that I want. These are important to me. I don't care about anybody else. These are my goals, right? So then those are the things that are intrinsic. They're inside me. They're inside each of us. And they're all different. Now, there may be some degree of overlap, but generally speaking, one is the self-satisfaction of getting those goals on your own. Okay? These usually, very important factor. These are long-lasting motivators. When it comes from inside you, when it's intrinsic, and when you can be a supervisor who can empower employees to reach their own goals, then it's long lasting and you're going to not have high turnover and you're going to have people who love to work with you and who are highly productive, etc. But if they're coming outside, if they are extrinsic, if they are the stick where people are afraid of punishment or some other kinds of consequence, then what happens are these are short-term motivators. They last as long as you're on that job, or they last as long as you are, trying to accomplish a particular project for a boss, or as long as you're on the job that day. Okay, so they're very short term, and that's not how we develop people to reach their full potential. Okay? So we want people to be self-motivated as well as externally motivated. Okay. Now, if you go over to the next page, I want to talk a little bit about what are known as attributions. Okay, so we talked about this and this. Well, first of all, the ideal, actual, and ought all represents what's known as the self-discrepancy theory. Those are the components, and those four verses are part of explaining what that is about. As you can imagine, we talked about the social comparison theory last class, that you're always comparing yourself, always. As healthy and as unhealthy as that is. And we're going to get to even more of that in a little bit today. All right, so let's talk about attributions. Oh my gosh. Okay, an attribution on page 42 are links we make to identify the cause of a behavior in ourselves or others, all right? And this is highly done by your family and your social setting, your social work and your family setting. So these are expressions like, you can't do anything right. All right. So the attribution is you, no matter what it is, can't do anything right. It's a phrase I'm going to use. Right? And you're in the house, and that's what I say. Or you're on the job, might as well fire you. Okay? You can't do anything right. In dysfunctional family settings or dysfunctional work settings, etc., you're going to hear those kinds of negatives, and attributions can be so damaging to a person's self-esteem. Okay. Typically what happens is that there is what's known as a cycle of praise, punishment. Praise, punishment. And when the praise is given, it's discounted. Okay? Example. If you are in a situation where somebody says to you, or you come home and you say, hey, I just ran the fastest time ever in the 440. And your parents say, you must not have had very good competition running against you. Right? That's a defeating statement to you. You and that high, you're really excited about a new personal best, and that person and won a competition, but somebody undermines or disses that accomplishment by comparing you with somebody else. Okay, these happen a lot. Another classic example. You come home and you say something to your significant other. I'm so excited. I just aced my anatomy physiology exam. And your significant other says, wow, must have been an easy test. Oh my goodness, you guys, you hear these. Right now you're all thinking, oh yeah, I have those people in my life who say that to me. Those are what we call noxious people. Noxious. Okay? Or toxic. They don't know how to celebrate with you. They don't know how to allow you to have a moment of triumph. Excuse me. This stuff gets in my, makes me so dry and cough. All right. So you will want to start now listening. In fact, if you do any kind of a cookout this Labor Day weekend with family, is listen to, observe what people say to you and to others. Lots of times people will say it as if I'm joking. There is a concept called the kernel of truth. All right. So at the core, the kernel, the nut, the center of all comments, the speaker believes there's truth. So a joke can be seen as, if somebody says, oh, I didn't mean any offense by it, or the person knows I'm just joking, or that person's not like that, we're just, joshing, that kind of stuff. The joke stater in this theory believes that no, there is a tiny speck, little kernel of truth that is there. And what happens is that we hear, remember the building blocks of words, we hear the words and we then give it meaning. We actually create meaning out of every word. It may be inaccurate or it might be accurate, but we need to create meaning because of our brains operating where we have to understand of what people are saying. We try to understand what people are saying. Okay, so now let's look at other factors that play into the ideal, the actual, and the ought. And one of those is to look at culture. Oh my goodness, culture gets very complex. Very popular topic, or IPC, interpersonal communication theory, to use for your term project is collectivist versus individualist societies or cultures, okay? And it's introduced in this book on this page, on page 42, but it'll talk about it a little bit more later. All right, so let's go back to the art and the culture for a moment. If you are raised in a family that is high achievers, maybe attorneys, physicians as parents or grandparents or siblings, etc. You all were athletes, highly competitive in your individualized sports, whatever that sport might have been. You see that money is the symbol of success. The acquisition of wealth is a representation of success. Then you would identify more strongly with what's known as an individualist culture. Okay? The individualist is just that, it's all about the individual. When we look at data that ranks who are the most individualist countries in the world, the United States ranks right up there, close to the very, very top. Right? May not be at the number one all the time, but we're either 1, 2, or 3, depending on the survey. That means that it's about me, myself, and I. All right? That's a culture. That's how we're raised. That's what we see on TV. That's what we see in the advertisements. That's what we see in the politics. That's what we see all over the place. Okay? So that represents the American culture, it just does. But let's say that you are working for, you're in the automotive program and you are a star and you actually decide to get into engineering for auto design, etc., and you get hired by Honda. And no, let's say you get hired by Nissan. I like Nissan. I like my Infiniti. You get hired by Nissan Infinitis. And you are sent to Japan to work in their plant operations and observe their designers and their research and development that they're doing on a particular make of car. So you go travel, you're all excited, you're going to Japan, you're going to drink sake, you're going to, eat lots of Japanese food. Hope you like eel, etc. And all of a sudden, you kind of get these feelings. The looking glass self, when people interact with you, is that they really don't like you. And you're not sure why. But they don't want to socialize with you after work. They definitely don't want to schmooze on the job. It's just not going well. It's just ugly. Well, it's because Japan, especially 20 years ago, although now they're changing a little bit, is highly collectivist culture. Okay, that means they are not about the individual. They are about the community. They are about the group. They are about the team. And they don't compete. They work together. And everything is about teamwork. All right. Now that collectivist is one of the reasons why the Japanese manufacturers excelled in the 1970s and 80s, which started to put the American cars out of business. It's because they were able to collectively work together to create fuel saving cars to meet the needs of the energy crises that were going on at the times, whereas the American cars were still building those gas guzzlers, all right, Ford, GM, etc. So this is valuable in understanding how you ought to behave versus how you're actually behaving when you are traveling outside the United States. And you may want to, envision yourself doing work in Peru or in Israel or wherever it might be, and you think, oh my gosh, I need to find out, are they collectivists or individualists, and what other kinds of cultural communication styles do they have that I need to be aware of? Okay, you guys are either all on your phones, or you are really bored, or you are following along beautifully. So I need to stop and check in. What questions might you have? Are you seeing? Oh, yes, I see a hand up. Your question?
What exactly do you mean by attribution?
What do I mean by
attribution?
the attributions? The attributions is how you, thank you for that question. The attributions means that you assign a characteristic to a person, all right? So you credit a person with a particular characteristic behavior. So in my example, when I said, if you were a runner and you felt really good about beating somebody, if somebody comes over or responds to that and says, well, your competition must not have been very good, the person is attributing poor running skills to you, all right, through innuendo, through suggestion. All right, good question, good clarification. Anybody else have another clarification question? Okay, good. All right, so let's talk about the self-enhancement bias. And this bias, you all do right now. So as soon as I said, oh my gosh, you must all be on your phones or laptops or just really bored or something like that. You see how you all are looking down right now? When I said that earlier and walked over to look at you, all of your heads popped up. In that moment, you were enhancing the image of yourself by looking attentive. So you wanted to present a bias, you wanted me to believe a feeling, a thought that you are highly attentive to what we're talking about in the class. All right, and so you demonstrated it through body language. All right, you also are gentlemen who asked the question, did a self-enhancement bias act by asking a question that was on topic, on point with the lecture, and that unconsciously or maybe consciously was to demonstrate that, oh no, I'm listening. In fact, I have a clarifying question. All right, and that's what we do all the time. Okay. You might want to read that section closely on your own because it also talks about economics, and it gets into people who see themselves as, wanting to be economically secure and they want to have high degree of economic wealth are from individualist societies. They don't need to depend on others, right? People who tend to be, or cultures that tend to be less affluent, who clearly need to depend on each other for food supplies, for water, for social well-being, all those things are identified as collectivist cultures. So another element to think about. Now, the book gives you some interesting statistics or data about race and gender. There's lots of stuff going on with this. And if you were to, for instance, be interested in the white citizenry in South Africa as opposed to the African citizenry in South Africa, especially since apartheid was back in the 80s, you're kind of curious to know, well, what's going on now? You would see that there are some differences in self-perception and self-esteem. And when you compare that to here in the United States, it's very interesting, all right? So I'm not gonna read these, but I do want you to read these on your own in terms of gender, biracial identities, and race and ethnicity as well. Right, so we'll talk about those at another time. All right, so I want to begin to wrap this up to talk about media. Media is the bane of our existence. While you're watching a show where it's not streaming and you have to deal with commercials, watch the commercials. What are they communicating? And what I will tell you, 9 times out of 10, unless they are a public service, they are communicating to you, me, that we are less than. And if we want to be more, then we got to buy their products or their services. So media, and especially in advertising, they play on this information. They use this to the hilt. Marketing specialists take courses in the psychology of communication and the utilization of words and the building blocks so that they can manipulate the viewing public to motivate extrinsically somebody to buy something, because if they motivate extrinsically, there's going to be a reward. You're going to be thinner. You're going to have more hair. You're going to have the significant others think you're more attractive. You're going to get more dates. You're going to get higher grades. You're going to get into the college of your choice, blah, blah, blah. The problem with these is that when we start to look at our ideal, are we being realistic in our ideal? Or are we allowing others, especially media, to paint an unrealistic ideal for what we are striving for? Now, some people thought that my desire in the late 1990s to become a female vice president in a $350 million international company was pretty unrealistic. The glass ceilings, there weren't that many that had been broken yet. All right? And if I was to buy in to, oh, you should just be happy with being a stay-at-home mom, or just be happy raising your kids, or you don't need to travel. oh my gosh, what are your kids going to do when you're gone? All right. If I had bought into what others were saying, I would not have agreed that my goal was actionable. But it was, and I did accomplish it. So we have to balance what is realistic and what's not. Now, another goal I always wanted to have was, okay, now get this, I'm only 4'10". When I was in high school, I weighed 100 pounds. I'm well over 100, well, not well over. I'm 131 pounds now, okay? That's a whole lot of more pounds. Now, do I want to get to an ideal weight of maybe being 120 in my 60s? Yes. Is that realistic? Sure. Do I want to go back down to being 100? No. I'm going to look like a skeleton. Even though everybody's telling me I should, they're shooting all over me, I am going to resist because I have to be able to know what's good for me. Okay? So body weight, body image, oh my gosh, don't think it's just women either. What is done to males is just as bad, which is why there's such a huge industry in, enhancement pharmaceuticals. So, I mean, in all parts of the anatomy. And so really we need to just step back and say, no, no, no. To some extent, if we're healthy and we're happy, what we are, we're okay with. All right. That obviously then comes back to our social comparison theory. So hopefully, as we wrap this up for today, you are really seeing how all these theories are highly integrated. There's a whole lot of stuff going on there that just doesn't even feel ethical. So, photoshopping for all the photographs of people. One of the videos that I have listed in your module is by Cameron Russell, who's a very famous model, and it's a TED Talk that she does. And some of you may want to watch that because she talks about the fakeness of what goes on in the field of advertising and modeling, etc. It's very enlightening, and it starts to demonstrate a lot of these or reinforce these. So at the bottom of page 46, and as you start to think about what journal you want to select, and you may want to read ahead and look what the journal assignments are. These self-examination questions at the bottom here can be very helpful for you. Take a moment. If you journal, write your answers in a journal. Think about how does media influence your perceptions of yourself, your body image, of your hair, appearance. How does media describe the typical man and the typical woman? Barbie doll. I mean, a Barbie figure would not be able to stand up, literally, anatomically. And then I also want you to think about the atypical bodies based on media and how they're portrayed. Are they the brunt of jokes? Are they in the comedies? Or a tragic figure in a drama? Even look at the movies and see how it plays out. All right, so any questions? All right, I am going to stop our recording.